And salutations, ranting engineer back at you. So what we're going to talk about tonight. Tonight we're going to talk about risk, acceptable risk, unacceptable risk, and how as a society and as people we accept risks and not realize it. So where does this start with? So in industry we have things like PHAs, HAZOPs, risk evaluations. Basically what it is, it's a matrix. 5x5, 6x6 depending on the company. We'll say on the low corner here is green, basically acceptable risk or low risk. In the middle is kind of a band of yellow, sometimes orange, that is potentially acceptable risk, but largely there's risk in there. Then you go to the reds, unacceptable risk. So we got this whole gambit. What we're going to talk about is that yellow band, because you might be surprised how much of that yellow band we personally accept as acceptable risk when maybe it's not acceptable risk. Yeah, I'm not going to drag you through a HAZOP. It basically is, it looks at the likelihood or the probability or the frequency of an incident happening, and it crosses with some mathematics the severity. So if you have something that is very low likelihood to happen but extremely severe, it's usually up in the yellow, might be in red, depending basically if it kills somebody or multiple people or leads to destruction of environment or it's really bad. The other side of it is you might have something that's fairly benign but happens so often it puts people at risk. It usually, again, pushes it to yellow. Red is unacceptable risk. I've never had a red signed off. Basically, in these risk matrices, you'd have to go to a president to get that signed off. I've never actually had one happen. Yellow, you might get into yellow. So what we do is we evaluate the system without safeguards. Then we evaluate with safeguards. Usually without safeguards, it's yellow, it's red. But as soon as you start adding, we call it layers of protection or credits, it starts bringing it down towards green. So usually water, you spill water on the floor, small amounts of it, it's green. Why? It's not going to affect anybody. It's low pressure. Anyways, not going to take you through HAZOP. However, the first thing that should open your eyes to about the difference between acceptable and unacceptable risk. If I do a HAZOP, and we did, on driving, it is high yellow. You're like, pardon me? High yellow means the VP of a company would have to sign off on it saying, yes, we will take this risk. It's not green. That should open your eyes. So basically what I said, and I said previously, is if we do a HAZOP on driving, it fails. Because most companies go, if it's yellow, you will put enough safeguards in that it goes towards green. When you look at the HAZOP, basically you only get one credit. It's basically operator training. Again, not going to bore you with the details. You want to learn how to go through a HAZOP and risk ranking, email me directly. We do it all the time. The point is, most people in society get into a car and they've accepted that risk. Because the severity is you're going to die if you get into a car crash. The likelihood is higher than what industry will tolerate. If I were designing a system around driving, it would fail 90% of the times. They'd say unacceptable, add more safety. So let's start talking about masks, the flu, the COVID. So let's talk about what we've accepted as risk. So driving is one of them. The next one is the flu. Whether you realize it or not, we've been conditioned to assume that the flu will come every year. We expect it. So the probability is high. We know it's going to show up. What we've been conditioned to is that the flu will affect a certain amount of the population. They will die. You might lose some children, some young ones. It might affect the elderly. But we've been conditioned, okay, that there's an acceptable loss of life. And every year it's going to happen. We might get the flu. We might get the flu shot. We try to do the best to stay away from our loved ones that are sick so they don't get it. But we've been programmed, like driving. If we did that acceptable risk with a risk matrix, the flu is yellow because it happens every year. When it happens every year, that pushes it from green, yellow, almost to red. Do you think that's acceptable risk? From a company standpoint, it is not. Industry standpoint. That should open your eyes. So we call it acceptable risk, as in risk that they will accept to operate. We accept the risk of driving. We accept the risk of the flu. So let's move to Ebola. You're like, Ebola, holy shit. Yeah, exactly. Because we perceive that Ebola is very deadly if you get it, the risk in our brain goes to red. When you look at the data, Ebola, it's not highly contagious, okay? So, but in our mind, that's unacceptable risk. Oh man, we get this, we're dead. We better stay away, contain everything else. Look at SARS, the SARS outbreak. Now with that, it also had a fairly high death ratio. It was somewhat contagious. The difference was is you could track it easily. You know who were sick because the symptoms were so severe. So they were able to contain it. Okay, but it was, as far as you know, it was fairly contagious. But right away, SARS, oh shit, it's bad. It's into the red. It's red risk because we've perceived that the severity is so high, it pushes it into the red zone. So the safety is stay away from that, isolate, medicate, treat, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so H1N1. I got H1N1 actually. When it came through, it has 3 different symptoms. It hit 2 of my kids really friggin' hard. Like they were as red as a Coke can for a while, delirious. My ex and I were freaking out. Then suddenly it broke. It was tough on 2 of the kids. My ex and one of the other kids kind of got, if I remember right, they got the chest cough, they got the crappy low-grade fever. Basically, it was a flu. And myself and one of the other kids, we got what we would call a ball-bearing gut ache. It felt terrible. I barely registered a fever. I had body aches, but it felt like ball bearings were going through my intestines. The point is we knew basically the 3 ways it was going to hit. We knew it was contagious. It hit like 1.5 billion people. It killed a certain amount. It came through. There was a bit of a fervor about it, but in our brain it was, okay, this is a flu, but it's a new flu. And when you go through the H1N1, it's actually been to Canada a couple times. You'd be surprised. Go back. It was here in the 70s, the 50s, I think. Now we start getting into what is acceptable risk. Give myself an example. I've had a flu shot since grade 9, St. Mike's. I got an injection. I got the flu shot when I was in grade 9. I called mom and dad, says, I don't like how this makes me feel. Can I opt out? Yep. I haven't had a flu shot since then. That's a long time. Have I got sick? Yes. I remember getting a flu once or twice in high school range, usually when I got home after exams. I got a really nasty one in university. It hurt so much you couldn't even move your eyes. It affected most of us in the Waterloo area and in southern Ontario. I do remember getting one before H1N1. It affected my lungs. I had a real problem with it. It almost like turned into pneumonia. I got H1N1. I really haven't been sick since then until earlier this year. I assumed I got the flu. My lungs burned for a couple days. I had the body aches. I burned through it. I tend to burn through flus fairly quickly when I get them. I get sick really badly, and then I get over it. Because even my buddy and my fiance Wendy are like, you don't ever get sick. So I don't get the flu shot because my acceptable risk is it's acceptable risk. I think it's low. I don't need it. I accept the risk of potentially get the flu, but because I've gotten the flu so rarely, I'm okay with it. So let's bring in COVID. So we know COVID is contagious. We know that. So it's comparable, we'll say, to H1N1. It's highly contagious. Where the struggle is on the severity. Because if you've been reading the news, and not Facebook bullshit, go out and read papers. I shouldn't say that. You read papers is good for putting you to sleep. The point is we don't know the severity. Some people, like the outbreak that they had here at the one gym, the one woman said she thought she had allergies. It was so slight. The papers in Denmark, when they looked at it, a lot of the population that had it didn't know they had it. They just didn't know. However, other people can get hit extremely hard, and the reports are no. Some people it hits like a brutal flu. Some of it will kill them. That's the wild card. So I have a high probability it's going to push it into yellow. But the severity, because in general as an engineer, when I have ill-defined severity, I tend to push it up in general. So I got green down here, yellow in the middle, there. Well, we're reading yellow, period, because of the contagiousness. It's creeping up to, we'll say, orange and red because of unknown severity. And this is what people are arguing about. It's a valid argument. However, from an industry standpoint, if I risk rank this, and you say I don't have a mask, the mask is a layer of protection. Like I was saying, it's a filter unit. So even though this is highly contagious, if I have good filters, so remember, the probability of this one only lowers it, doesn't make it zero. So everybody had a good mask if they could wear them. Okay, it now takes, even though the probability of catching this, if you're exposed to it is high, it now takes the exposure and drops it. So the severity is still there because it's an unknown. Let's assume the worst severity. We take the probability of probability of transmission and drop it down with good filtration on our faces. Okay, it goes into acceptable risk. However, these people that are saying, I don't want to wear a mask because it's government control and everything like this, I respect what you say, but my math says no. And I love math. I'm an engineer. By putting the masks on, I can take credits of layer of protection at LOPA. I used to call it SIL, or again, back to a HAZOP. So by putting those masks on, I'm lowering the probability, like I said in the other video, the likelihood, or the percent, we'll just keep it as likelihood, the probability of transmission, which lowers the likelihood of getting it. Do you understand? So people come in with biases thinking, I'm not going to wear a mask because my tolerance to risk is a high yellow. I don't think the severity of this is going to be, and that's the wild card out of this, is we don't know the severity. We don't have enough emerging data. I think they've just proven it's part of blood type. They're looking into T cells. Do you got to get it bad enough to do the antibodies? Do the antibodies disappear? It's a wild card. So why don't we err on the side of extra safe? Wear your mask. Okay? So now we're in the red, yellow. Let's try to get this to the acceptable risk of green and not using our own biases and tolerances. I don't get the flu shot. Okay? If people want to get the flu shot, that's fine. Just don't tell me I have to get the flu shot. Okay? That is my acceptable risk. But I'm smart enough to know that, hey, guess what? This COVID presents a severity that's an unknown, pushes it towards the yellow-red. Guess what? I'm going to wear the masks. Because it might not affect me, but it's not always about me. It could be my mom and dad. One of my kids could get it really bad. My kids might have had it. We don't know. One of my friends at badminton might be one of the ones that has a bad reaction to it. What is that risk? What is the acceptable risk? So everybody says, oh, we're freaking out, blah, 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 blah. Are we? That's the unknown. From an engineering perspective, with unknowns, we tend to go a little more conservative. We go, hey, this is red, let's add layers in there. Once again, we're back to masks. Use a good mask. A good mask lowers the probability. It brings the risk matrix down, okay? Never mind about liberties and everything else like that. The mathematics tell you it makes it more safe. Period. Okay, if you want to argue, that's fine. I will take you through a risk rank. It might put you to sleep. But it's hard to argue when you put the mathematics, and this is established. This isn't a program. And again, unknown severity. If you assume that this is just a flu, we're still in yellow. Back to acceptable risk. You do something by driving in a car every day that industry says isn't good enough and would fail. For 90% of the companies in this industry, because it's in yellow, they say not good enough, not acceptable risk. I'll let you think about that when you think about COVID, the flu, etc. All right. Have a good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We'll talk soon. Bye.